Welcome everyone here in Zurich. My name is Isabelle and I'm a data and AI strategy consultant at Synpulse. Today I'm here with Marc, my colleague, and we're going to talk about the impact that GenAI makes on the commercial insurance industry. Welcome Marc, good to have you here. Would you maybe briefly want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi Isabelle. I'm Marc Kirchhofer. I'm an associate partner based here in Zurich. I'm also leading the global commercial insurance practice. We're running projects for large corporate and specialty insurance company in the space of digitalization, innovation, transformation, but also technology advisory and data and AI. I'm also spearheading a risk data exchange initiative in Germany together with the GVNV, which tries to standardize and harmonize the whole risk data exchange amongst all the parties in the market.
Nice, welcome. Super good to have you here. So you might actually wonder why I brought you here, specifically on this cold winter day in Zurich. So we're standing in front of the Grossmünster, an iconic Romanesque style building, right? Built over centuries, starting in, I think, in the 1100s. And back in the day, the builders and the architects, they had to rely on many very complex calculations, traditional techniques to be able to build this kind of building. Nowadays, from a data and AI perspective, of course, they could have done it much quicker. They could rely on rule-based systems, for example, to make these calculations faster, but also machine learning incorporating way more data points. This use of data and AI nowadays is not only apparent in building buildings or churches, but also in all kinds of industries. We see it, for example, in aviation, in fashion, in retail, manufacturing, and of course in insurance. So that's why I brought you here today, because I'm curious to learn more about how traditionally data and AI was used in the commercial industry. Could you maybe elaborate on that?
Well, to start off, not that well. Compared to other industries, the insurance industry always had to deal with large amounts of unstructured and unstandardized data. Think of statement of work, loss runs, third-party risk reports, ESG data, and so on. All that data is highly relevant, but the unstructured nature of it makes it extremely difficult to extract it and directly analyze it. So it was very time-consuming, and it's also very inconsistent because different underwriters might actually evaluate that unstructured data differently. So we always had a lot of data, but it is about the right data in the right quality at the right time to really speed up your assessment. Let me give you an example. For example, an underwriter needs to price a large corporate property risk, right? Oftentimes what he does, he looks at the 5 to 10 largest locations in terms of sum insured or maybe loss expectancy, but he doesn't have the time to actually go through the unstructured information of all the other locations, despite very significant, which can still lead to quite massive losses.
Yeah.
Historically though, and also it's worth mentioning, the insurance industry has used traditional AI methods in the past. Though on very much isolated cases, think of claims classification, fraud detection, coverage checks, subrogation and identification, or even basic calculation of risk scores. However, these models were quite rigid, needed quite some training data, and as such, were not as easy transferable and adjustable as the new models.
Very interesting, and also to see that there is already this vast amount of data, both structured and unstructured, which is present and is used to some extent, but still difficult to fully capture the value out of it. I think also what you say with the rigidness, it is also where traditional AI becomes, the limitations of it become apparent. It's a bit like, it reminds me of this building as well, right? It's beautiful and it's an architectural brilliance, but at the same time it's not very adaptable. If you look at, for example, when the temperature changes or when the lighting changes, this building traditionally wasn't built to automatically adapt to it. Of course, over time, lighting, there are innovations that you can put on top to adapt for the weather, for the lighting, etc. But at the same time, it is something you put on the existing process or the structure already, which is, I think, also if you look, for example, in insurance, the same thing, right? So you have a process, and now with new innovations in technology space, with data and AI, you put it on top of the existing processes, but requires quite a lot of manual reprogramming if it's, for example, a rule-based system, and it's less flexible, so to say, and which makes it difficult for an industry such as commercial insurance, which has a lot of unique scenarios. But which is interesting is that GenAI actually changes the whole game, which we will talk about in a bit. So before we were standing at the Grossmünster, a beautiful ancient church, which was built around 1100s, and now we're standing in front of the Prime Tower. Quite modern skyscraper, which is versatile, adaptive, sustainable, and able to actually adapt to the circumstances and the environment. This is also how we can look at traditional AI and generative AI, right? As I mentioned before, traditional AI mirrors a bit the Grossmünster. It's built for very specific tasks, routine, and therefore being able to create both efficiency but also effectiveness gains. However, not very adaptable, and like we mentioned before as well, very rigid. If we then look at GenAI, it mirrors more the versatility of the Prime Tower, which is it's able to automatically adapt to the temperature changes, to the lightning, for example. And not only that, on top of that, it's now also able to create new information, new data, for example, energy consumption reports. This shift of traditional AI to GenAI is what we see apparent more and more in different kind of industries. Of course, still at the beginning because it's quite a new technology, but it's interesting to see what the new value is that it creates, but how we have to look at it differently. So GenAI has different types of roles. We can look at it as assisting, for example, the insurance analysts with summarizing complex long documents. It can extract both structured and unstructured data from various sources, which makes what you said earlier also a huge impact on the insurance industry. Then we have the generation, which I mentioned before, for example, with energy consumption reports, but also communication, for example, to customers, what you also see in the retail market with hyper-personalization, right? And then lastly, also evaluate. And that means already new data, new information against existing company knowledge. These different kind of roles of GenAI, as said, we see in different industries, but we have had these conversations before as well. We also see in the commercial industry. Now I'm curious, where do you see the added value of GenAI with these different kind of roles that it can play in the commercial insurance industry, and especially also with the risk data exchange initiative, which you mentioned earlier?
As mentioned earlier, the Risk Data Exchange tries to standardize and harmonize the risk data exchange in the commercial insurance industry amongst all the carriers, such as corporates, brokers, and insurers, through one unified interface. So that shared understanding and identification of the underlying risk object really makes it easier to improve the process end to end. However, industrial risks are inherently complex. Every single risk is different than the other. You might have different wordings, you might have bespoke coverages, and each and every insurer might use actually different data points in order to price such risks. Hence, at least in the short term, we will need to work with unstructured or semi-structured information, and that's exactly where GenAI comes to the rescue. You can extract, analyze, evaluate unstructured information in a very efficient way. And let me give you an example. Insurance companies, they receive hundreds of submissions. They can directly analyze these submissions. They can run their sanction checks and ESG checks. They can look at the risk appetite. They can compare it with their underwriting guidelines. They can even do preliminary pricings and see how that risk might actually impact their overall portfolio. And they can do that before actually an underwriter touches it. So when an underwriter comes in, that prioritization, that segmentation has already happened, and we can make sure that the underwriter really looks at the right risks which have the biggest impact for him and the company.
Yeah, very interesting. So also what you mentioned at the beginning, this large untapped potential. Because of GenAI, can actually create value from that, but also in a way more structured, efficient way, being able with all these different parties to communicate with each other, therefore better. I'm looking forward to see also in practice how it's developing, and given the speed of GenAI's innovation, I'm sure it's going to be very interesting to learn more. Just as we progressed from the Grossmünster now to the Prime Tower, a skyscraper that's adaptable, we also see the move from traditional AI to GenAI that has the potential to revolutionize the whole commercial insurance industry. It has the potential to not only enhance existing processes, but really revolutionize, transform the processes, really looking at it differently, as we just explained as well. It's not only about increasing efficiency, so sort of the 10% increase of value, but also the 10 times increase of value, and having to look at the process differently. If you want to learn more about this, we've actually also published an article very recently about LLMs as interns, but you can of course always reach out to either Marc or myself to learn more. Stay tuned for any updates.